Hey YouTubers! So today's topic, all across social media, on my Instagram Live, Facebook Live, and TikTok Live, I've talked about dialogue. Dialogue in fiction specifically. So obviously we could talk about dialogue forever. I mean, we could go on for hours and days, but I'm going to try to do this in 10 minutes. So I'm only going to hit the key points, alright? First and foremost, dialogue is exactly what you think it is, in case you don't know or somebody's younger watching this. It is when a character is speaking out loud verbally to another character. Not thinking, anything like that. That's internal dialogue and something different. Okay, the next thing is you want to remember to have a very healthy balance between dialogue and narrative. What's narrative? Narrative is everything that's not dialogue. It's the narrator telling the story, right? It's the descriptions, it's the exposition, it's all that stuff. Everything that's not dialogue. And you don't want to go too heavy-handed with the dialogue, or else it's basically a screenplay. And you don't want to go too heavy-handed with the narrative, or you're into literary fiction and Hemingway type stuff that you probably aren't wanting to write. Another key point is try not to use really long dialogue paragraphs. If you feel like your character has one very long thing to say and the other character is not going to interrupt them or interject. Here's another thing I learned a few years ago that has made a big difference in my writing. If you're going to have, let's say, a long paragraph worth of dialogue, do not just write that whole paragraph of dialogue with one beginning quote and one end quote. Instead, every 2 or 3 sentences, break up the dialogue with some body language indicators. For example, she shifted her foot from one, or her weight from one foot to another. She crossed her arms over her chest. She flipped her hair over her shoulder. She wiped her brow. She gulped. She sighed. She whatever. Whatever it is, and here's why. Think about dialogue as a natural conversation between 2 characters, the same way you would have a conversation in real life between 2 people, right? Like in all reality, unless this one particular character is highly formal or highly educated and snobby, you're not going to talk in a way that's very verbose, very wordy, very long and drawn out. You're going to talk casually. You're going to say, hey, what's up? Yeah, you want to keep it casual and realistic. Talk in dialogue in your book the way you would talk to a friend, for the most part. All right, so also you want to not use short, choppy dialogue so that it's just back and forth, unless there's a point to it. Unless the whole point is that somebody's being very choppy and curt or terse. So also make sure that you are properly punctuating your dialogue. That's something I see so often, especially with new authors, is the confusion over where commas go versus where quotations go versus when do you capitalize the next word, when do you not. If that's something you have to kind of see to get right, so I can't really describe it verbally. Just do your research and make sure that you are properly punctuating your dialogue. In most cases, you want to have a comma before the end quotes, especially if you're using a dialogue tag after, like he said, she replied. If you're not using a dialogue tag, then you just put a period end quote. That's about as basic as I can get without trying to explain something that's really a visual thing. Then there's internal dialogue that I mentioned earlier. What is internal dialogue? It's what it sounds like. It's thought. It's the character whose perspective you're in, mind that, not other characters, but the character whose perspective you're writing in. It's their internal thoughts. So what you would do for a thought, an internal dialogue, is you would new paragraph, italics, no quotes, and put the thought, oh my God, I can't believe he just said that. That's your internal thought, okay? So you would do, oh my God, I can't believe he just said that. Period, all that's in italics, no quotes, and no dialogue tags. So you don't say, oh my God, I can't believe he just said that, I thought. The fact that you have it in all italics and set off in its own paragraph is indicative to the reader that this is an internal thought. So putting a thought dialogue tag on the end is basically redundant. There's no point. So don't do that. It's just put, oh my God, I can't believe he just said that, and then get back to your narrative with a new paragraph. Okay, with dialogue, another thing that we talked about, some TikTokers had questions about how do you write dialect and accents. That's a great question. I want to address that before we go. One thing you don't want to do, another very common mistake with new writers, is to try to phonetically spell out an accent. Meaning, if it's a vampire saying, I want to suck your blood, and put a V instead of a W. Don't do that. I know it seems natural, it seems like the right thing to do. One word like that every now and then, you could probably get away with for effect. But when you do an entire sentence, or God forbid, an entire paragraph of dialogue, where you're changing the spelling of every other word to indicate accent or dialect, it's going to drive the reader bonkers, because the reader is going to be looking at it like they're going to stumble. You know, your writing should flow. Your writing should visually, to a reader, they should go flow, 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 flow. Just read right through it very easily. If you misspell words intentionally in order to prove your point that they have an accent, the reader's going to stumble over that because they don't know what words you're trying to say. They have to think about it for a second. And if your reader has to stop and think, you've done something wrong. So what do you do instead? Now, you can say the first time that this vampire is introduced. Let's say his name is Vladimir. He's a 800-year-old vampire from Slovakia, right? So the first time that the protagonist, Molly, meets this 800-year-old vampire, and he says something, I'm going to kill you. All right, whatever he says. Molly then thinks, or says in the narrative, I could barely understand a word he said because of his very thick Slavic accent. There you go. Guess what you've just done? You have just implanted in the reader's mind, subliminally or subconsciously or whatever, the idea that now every time they read that character, that vampire's dialogue, they're going to, without even thinking about it, they're going to hear a Slovakian accent. It's just natural. It's the way it goes. And so then you don't have to be so worried about, now you can do a word here or there for effect, you know, just to kind of remind the reader that they have an accent. And it is okay to do things like jargon and to use things like colloquialisms. Like, for example, you could say, I'm fixing to go to the store right now. Well, that's not proper, and you would never use that in narrative. But if your character's from the South, they're going to say fixin' to, because that's how we talk down here. So that is acceptable. Or saying darlin' without a G, that's acceptable. Those are all things that are commonly accepted and okay, because the reader still knows what that is. They don't have to wonder, what does darlin' mean? They know what that means. But when you purposefully misspell a word in order to prove a point that there's a dialogue, an accent, that's where you go wrong. And that, for the most part, is all I have to say about dialogue. I do want to remind you that if you're watching this YouTube video and it is prior to July 24th, 2020, I want you to remember that we are hosting a live webinar on July 24th at 7 p.m. 2020. If you're watching this after, sorry you missed it, but we'll have more. Anyway, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm hosting a live webinar called Three Secrets to Writing Novels That Sell. I'm going to put together 10 years of experience working for agents, working for publishers, being an award-winning best-selling author, editor, and author coach. All those things I've done over the last 10 years, I've come up with 3 things that I think are crucial to a successful novel. If you want to attend, and I hope you do, the registration information is below or above, wherever the video is, in the description of our video, of our channel, not this video, but the channel. You'll see the registration link. Or you can head on over to Instagram or Facebook, Write Your Best Book. That's our pages. First of all, like us. Follow us. Second of all, go to the bio on either Facebook or Instagram on Write Your Best Book, and you will see a registration link clear as day. And that's all the time we have for today, folks. We got in just under 10 minutes, and stay tuned for the next episode. Talk soon.